So welcome to the presentation today. Our team consists of members from the Health Equity Council, the University of New Mexico Office for Community Health and Department of Family and Community Medicine, and the Psychedelic Mental Health Access Alliance. First, we want to acknowledge that we are on stolen land. We honor the enduring stewardship and contributions of Indigenous peoples across New Mexico. We also acknowledge the legacy, labor, sacrifice, and significant contributions of Black Americans. We honor those whose forced labor helped build this country, and we recognize the ongoing responsibility to confront systemic injustice and inequality. And we also, especially at this particular moment, honor the vital role that immigrants have played in building and enriching the United States. And we commit to fostering communities of respect, belonging, and opportunity where all can contribute and thrive. I would like to mention that funding for this project was provided by the Psychedelic Mental Health Access Alliance, and we're very grateful for that. Because it's actually a very kind of innovative thing we're doing, and the fact that they recognize that and provided funding is significant. I'd like to turn it over now to our lead, Dr. Larry Lehman, and I'm going to be advancing the slides, so Larry, remember to indicate that to me.
Will do. Thank you, Jen. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for coming to this discussion. As we present it, I'm going to try to put this in the context of several things happening, with psychedelics in New Mexico, the state program, some of the research that we're doing, and also part of our state history. Next slide.
Yes, just a sec.
So, at this point in time, psychedelic-assisted therapies are, really kind of in a fulcrum changing point in the country. Some of us may have actually seen a rather fascinating press conference about a week ago where we had, the major people in the national leadership, talking about, potential end of psychedelic prohibition and supported research. So we're at a really transformative time. Breakthrough status, amounts to that there's numerous compounds that are close to being accepted, for depression, psilocybin, perhaps MDMA for PTSD, and that are coming out. Next slide. So as these are happening, one thing that our group in New Mexico, and I say our group kind of calling us all into like one big circle, I think is aware of that, that even though like these clinical trials are happening with individuals, that some of the healing that we're looking at and some of the wounds that we're looking at in society are beyond the individual, and they need to involve the community. So we've been looking at ways to develop models for psychedelic therapies that provide access and sustainability, and hopefully actually provide, long-term other effects like economic viability in the state. And so therapeutical psilocybin mushroom use is, we've now become the first state that's supporting that in a therapeutic program. Next slide. So just to remind everybody, the New Mexico Medical Psilocybin Act was just passed last year, and we now are in the process of working with the advisory board and subcommittees in DOH to create a program that not only allows the legal use of psilocybin, but does it in a way that provides equitable access and allows it to happen in a way of healing, in a way that's respective of the people in the state. The four indications are PTSD, treatment-resistant depression, substance use disorder, and end-of-life existential distress. Next slide. So at UNM, we've had a psychedelic-assisted therapy research program that's 1980s. When Rick Strassman did the first psychedelic research after the research prohibition with DMT. And there's been studies happening. Dr. Bott's done research is the lead for psilocybin and alcohol use disorder. At this point, we've been doing different studies, but most of the ones that we're doing, really all the ones we've been doing, have been, working with individuals. What we decided we wanted to do as we're doing research is actually look at group models and way that group models can function in a way that they're engaging with the community. Next slide. So the other thing that happens in a lot of the studies is that there's studies, the psychedelic studies, they're studies of people that, I guess the best way to describe it, that people that may not really exist. And let me explain a little bit what I mean by that. When I was in another state doing a sabbatical work, we had a whole study that was looking at psilocybin for people that had opioid use disorder, but all the criterias are ones that are just uncommon. It was being on a low dose. They couldn't smoke tobacco. They couldn't use marijuana. And so really, we looked at the idea of trying to be looking at the way of studying this in a way that they're pragmatic designs and they're both generalizable and support access. We decided that we wanted to look at ways that we can pilot programs that can be successful on a group level. We're doing it in the setting of a clinical trial, similar to what happens with the individuals, but we're rooting it in the levels of the group and trying to root it more in the community. We've been fortunate to have people interested nationally to help us in New Mexico, and we'll talk about that help, which we've greatly appreciated. Next slide. So the study that I'm going to talk a little bit about here, that's running sort of in parallel to the state program, is to look at group format psilocybin therapy for PTSD. The reason we picked PTSD is it applies to so many of our population groups. It applies to veterans, first responders, women survivors of sexual trauma, immigrants, indigenous people. So we chose PTSD as what we wanted to study. Using pragmatic inclusion and exclusion criteria that I mentioned, we're studying PTSD without ruling out people who have substance use. We also, to root this in more of the community and our cultures, a model that uses licensed therapists, but also uses trained peer facilitators. What those are people who have lived experience with PTSD in whatever group we're talking about, and they share that affinity to the participant. Showing up in therapy or ceremony is always an issue, and when you're actually dealing with a group in psychedelics, we really felt strongly that bringing in the peers was a core part of this. We're using whole mushrooms rather than chemical synthesized mushrooms, synthesized psilocybin, because that's in alignment with the state program. There's been very little research happening with actually whole mushrooms. One thing that we also felt like we all know, and I think people know around the country, is that it's not just about your sessions with the medicine, whether that's psilocybin or MDMA, but it's how that affects your life and your behaviors and community. And so that is what we call integration, which is the days, months, years that occur afterwards. So we developed an extended integration model we're going to share about. And then to have access, part of it is it needs to be in a way that can be shown to be cost efficient to get support. So we're doing a concurrent cost modeling assessment. Next slide. So as we've done this, there are some really key partnerships that I want to call out and honor. You're going to hear more about. Psychedelic Mental Health Alliance has been core, and the Health Equity Council. So, have you hear more about those. First, we'll have Hanifa talking about the Psychedelic Mental Health Access Alliance.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry, so much. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good now, wherever you may be tuning in from. So grateful that you're all here and that we've arrived at this point. So again, my name is Hanifa Nayo Washington. I am the co-director of the Psychedelic Mental Health Access Alliance. And the alliance part of our title is so important. We can't and could not do the work that we've set out to do without being in deep partnership and alignment with various groups across the country. We are a nationally serving organization, and our goal really is to create more equitable access to psychedelic assisted therapy and psychedelic assisted care as it comes into the medical model. And so to do that, we really have to have a strong Medicaid process and a strategy to be able to create the data, to confirm that this is safe, that it's effective, to create models that are culturally attuned. And so being able to partner with UNM on our first sort of combined pilot is really exciting. So this is the first pilot that we're helping to co-implement with the goal of implementing similar pilots across the country. And so that's a major process by which we'll gather the data and the evidence to show and convince and support policymakers to ensure that these types of services and interventions can be covered by state dollars and Medicaid dollars. So we do that in deep partnership. We do that in systems of care that already exist that are serving populations that are most impacted by things like trauma and depression, and also people being untreated for medical and mental conditions as well. We do this again in deep collaboration with various organizations, from advocacy to policy to researchers, and obviously, helping to inform how are we preparing the workforce, right, to be able to support in ways that are culturally attuned, in ways that are effective to move PAT into systems of care that work for marginalized communities. So I'm really excited to be here. And if you want to advance to the next slide, we,
Just a sec.
yeah, we are in a mental health crisis, and this country has been for a very long time. And disproportionately, you have communities of color, communities who are on the margins, your veterans, people who are low income, resource denied, are sitting and carrying the biggest burden of that mental health tsunami that we find ourselves in. And so for us, we understand that approval does not equal access. So you can have policies that get approved, you can have FDA approval accelerated and these mandates, but if we are not creating the research that shows that this is the way when the rubber meets the road, how to actually deliver this type of care effectively, safely, affordably to communities who need it the most, that approval will not translate into access. So this is really important work, and why we need to be doing the work now and not waiting 5, 10, 15 years from now. So equity, access, affordability, culturally attunement, all of those things are important when you're creating models and translating them from research into real world application. And that is what our partnership and involvement in this project is all about. And we are in deep gratitude and know that the findings and the practices and the learnings that come out of this particular study will have national impact in our national strategy, where we'll be doing a pilot here in a purple state, in a blue state, a red state, and then doing some larger scale gold standard studies that will combine everything that we're learning. So New Mexico is a keystone to our strategy, and we could not be more excited to be partnering with UNM and the Health Equity Council on this project. Thank you.
Great. Now, Enrique Cardiel from the Health Equity Council is going to talk.
All right, sorry, I was having a problem finding the unmute button. Yes, welcome everybody. My name is Enrique Cardiel. I'm the director of the Health Equity Council, and I've been happy to work with Deanna, Larry, Janice, who's on but no longer working with HEC, and others. Connecting ourselves with the partnership at UNM, the Office for Community Health, that we've been partnered with on and off for many years, the Psychedelic Mental Health Access Alliance. And our role is really to focus and bring into light the community engagement aspect of this. That's something that we do quite often And so helping this work be rooted with community engagement was important to us. Uh, from the beginning, we tried to make sure that community voice was centered and not added as an afterthought. Uh, that's often how things work is uh, something's created and then community is brought in. And that usually leads to some kinds of tensions as community doesn't understand how things got to where they're at. Uh, Psychedelic assisted treatment has a lot of promise, and we're looking forward to seeing how that evolves. But we know that the design of the model is vitally important, especially for the communities that are most impacted by trauma, communities that have mistrust of institutions, and generally communities that have unequal access to care. And so this work is attempting to address that. Um, there was a design studio, there was focus groups, interviews, and there will be ongoing community input. And we think that that's very important. Uh, there was community members involved, healers, veterans, first responders. We made sure to reach out to people from indigenous tribal communities and folks who have survived various traumas. Our goal is to better understand what safety, trust, and cultural relevance look like in a healing setting, and to be able to share our learnings, our collective learnings with others on that. And the next section will share key themes from the engagement process and how they're shaping a more equitable, community centered psychedelic assisted treatment as we go forward.
Great, thank you. Do you want to introduce Deanna?
Yes, I would love to. Uh,
Oh, sorry, it's Janice. Pardon
yeah,
me. Yeah.
okay. So Janice Herrera um, did a great deal of work on this when she was part of the Health Equity Council. She's moved on, but we're still in touch as she's here today. But um, just somebody that has a great deal of expertise and strength in community engagement. And so I'm honored to pass this over to Janice Herrera.
Thank you, Enrique. Glad to be here with everybody. I will be speaking about some of the preliminary parts of the community engagement part. So the design studio occurred on March 14th of last year. So this was following a planning period with our team. We had an information session, a recruitment period for the design studio, and then finally in March is when the design studio itself actually occurred. The approach for the design studio coupled both a virtual and in-person participation model. So we did have hybrid folks from all across the state who joined for the design studio session. It was a co-facilitation model. So my colleague Deanna Tabata, who will be presenting following myself, was our virtual facilitator. And then I did the in-person facilitation along with assistance from other HEC staff on note-taking. So we were very diligent to capture notes that were anonymized for the participants for this session so that we could get some really good quotes. The participants included a really broad group of individuals from across the state, including people who have gone to other states to get licensure as psychedelic facilitators, people who have used psychedelics themselves in the underground here in New Mexico, and then people who are curious about them and maybe hadn't had experience themselves. Next slide, please. So in addition to the actual design studio itself, which was about 3 hours long, we also conducted an online post-session survey using a forms format to get further reflections and feedback after the event. And so we invited participants who had attended either virtually or in person to fill out the form in order to share additional thoughts about cultural relevance, safety, and then also the inclusivity of our engagement process. And so that was our way of capturing feedback on the design studio itself. I feel that the most common feedback we got from that was that people could have talked about the topics for a lot longer. And I think that is a very fair note. You can go really deep. There are books and research papers that go on some of these topics. And so we continued to host other formats of community engagement as a mean to capture some of the more nuanced topics that, pardon me, we've broached upon during the initial design studio. Next slide, please. So the survey results highlighted a couple of other important things. They talked about the importance of facilitator cultural competency for the psychedelic-assisted therapy sessions themselves. It talked about the critical need for long-term integration support. And we did talk in the group about what long-term meant. And so most people in the group were on a similar page, but there was some divergence where some people felt support was needed for an extensive period afterwards, even up to a year. And so there was quite a bit of variation in the responses when we talked to folks about that. And then finally, people also talked about the need for access to trauma-informed care for people who are participating in the groups. And so there were a lot of examples of things that people thought might be complementary types of care for them to engage with after a session. Next slide, please. Overall results. So from the design studio session, we sort of split input into 3 categories. So we talked about considerations for before psychedelic-assisted therapy session, during the session, or in other words, set and setting, and then after the session. And then from the broader dialogue, we talked about for those different types of groups, the importance of the affinity group model. So making sure that people are present in the space together who have similar types of trauma. We talked about the importance of setting group norms. Examples that came up included physical contact, what's allowed and what's not allowed. If people would be allowed to not listen to music if there was music in a space, or things like that. A lot of setting of boundaries between what the individual may be comfortable with and what is going on in the broader group. And the importance of setting those things before the session had started so that everybody was on the same page and had awareness of what to expect prior to beginning. Expanded support resources was something that a lot of time was spent on in the design studio, with participants suggesting everything from providing lists of places in nature that someone could go for free after a session, since the session will be in an enclosed room, to also providing, journals, writing prompts, podcasts, books, or other things that someone may want to engage with after a session. And then a lot of people emphasized from a cultural perspective how the co-creation aspect of this particular pilot design was really important because many scientific studies approach research from a perspective of sort of imposing a design on the group that then will participate. And so a lot of people were very excited to hear that their perspectives and their voices would be taken into consideration and wanted to know follow-up and to be kept informed by the group as to how the pilot eventually unfolds. Next slide, please. So throughout the design studio session, community voices were centered. The prompts were provided in writing so that people could reflect upon them and review them. And people were given lots of time to contribute their inputs for each. The questions were designed to be open-ended. As I mentioned earlier, they were sort of split into those 3 phases. and we put a lot of focus on preparation, which was mainly about education, including not only for the individual, but including whoever their close-knit circle at home may be. We talked about cultural trauma, everything from how that could impact facilitation, how that could influence how people may react to the room and the way it's decorated. And then we also talked about group dynamics and how, bringing people together into a space where they're very open, they may want to interact after the session has ended themselves. And so, the importance of setting up again, framing boundaries over what people could expect in regards to these sorts of interactions. We invited a lot of diverse insights from people. Some people were really funny about what they shared. Some people had experiences that maybe were re-traumatizing for them that they wanted to, pass along so that we could try to avoid some of the things that may have happened to them in other types of experiences. And there was an awful lot of storytelling that happened in that regard. So, people sharing things that had happened to them, or maybe to one of their friends. Maybe they were facilitating for someone and observed something that was helpful or went well. And so there was a lot of collective wisdom in the space, which was really helpful. And we really tried, as facilitators, as co-facilitators, to provide a sort of democratic angle to the experience. We let the folks online have their own breakout session, because I think sometimes it can be intimidating to try to like break into a conversation if you're online and everyone else is in person. And so we really tried for all of our, both traditional and clinical type participants to give space for the wisdom that they had to share as well. Next slide, please. And this is my last one, which is areas for growth. There's always areas for growth. And for the design studio in particular, a couple that we'll highlight would be perhaps in the advertising and lead up for the participants, providing a more robust description as to their role, and framing it a little bit more with respect to the final purpose. So some of the participants that came in were, I think, perhaps hoping that they would be able to join the trial, for example, that they would be able to be eligible. And so the information we provided was that at a later date, when we actually started providing study information, that we would share what we have, but that, that's not the phase of the pilot that we were currently at. And so there was a little bit of perhaps misunderstanding about that. Another area for growth would be really working to integrate some of the structural equity concepts. So I know we had a lot of conversations, especially with Hanifa, about working to make the work that we do adaptable to other communities, where they could use a similar model or structure, but collect their own very local perspectives and cultural beliefs and best practices. And so, we I think are continuing to work to move that model forward. But from the very beginning of the project, thinking of tools that we could implement to make that possible and translatable. And then finally, inclusivity and group design. So the recruitment process that I mentioned earlier included going to some public events. It included putting flyers in public places like libraries, community centers, dispensaries, universities, campuses, and places like that. And so we were kind of pulling from a large group of people, and then in the end ended up having a less inclusive overall representation of attendees than I may have liked. And so if we had had more time, I would have loved to have hosted perhaps another design studio to have tried to pull in a bigger population. But like I said earlier, there are always some areas where you might hope to improve with more time. So at this point, I will go ahead and pass the baton to Deanna Tabata, who I had the privilege of working with at HEC. as a health promotion specialist. And Deanna really did a wonderful job pulling together final reports for HEC and picking up the last bits with focus groups and interviews once I left. And so I'm really grateful for Deanna for making all of that possible.
Thank you, Janice. Hi, everyone. My name's Deanna Tabitha, and I, as Janice mentioned, am a health promotion specialist at the Health Equity Council, and also had the honor of working alongside Janice and several other team members at HEC and UNM as well to capture the following components that we'll be getting into of our community engagement strategy. And so for the data collection phase of our community engagement efforts, namely the focus groups and the interviews, the goal here was really to hear directly from community members and people with lived cultural, clinical, and spiritual knowledge about what a psychedelic assisted therapy model would need to look like to feel safe, acceptable, and meaningful. So rather than only thinking about the clinical intervention itself, we wanted to understand the conditions needed around it, such as trust and preparation, facilitator characteristics, culture, safety, etc. So we can go to the next slide, Janet. So we utilized qualitative design, meaning we were less focused on the numbers and more focused on people's experiences, concerns, hopes, recommendations. And we utilized focus groups and interviews with semi-structured questions, but also left room for participants to bring up what mattered most to them. And that flexibility was important because the topic is deeply personal and intimate, and for many people, connected to trauma, identity, their cultural practices, and healing. Next slide, please. So data collection took place between December of 2025 through February of 2026. We held 3 focus groups, one with spiritual indigenous healers, one with veterans and first responders, and then another one with indigenous community participants. We also conducted 5 in-depth interviews with women who are or who were survivors or are survivors of sexual violence, excuse me. And together, these groups gave us a multi-perspective, if you will, understanding of how different communities are thinking about psychedelic assisted therapy, and especially in relation to trauma, safety, and trust. Next slide. So when we analyzed the data, we focused on identifying cross-cutting themes, barriers, and design implications for the psychedelic assisted therapy model. Next slide. And so starting with focus group insights, and you can also transition to the next slide, Janet. Thank you. Each group brought a different lens to the conversation, even though everyone had their own perspective. There were several themes that showed up across the groups. And so for the spiritual and indigenous healers focus group, one of the strongest messages was that plant medicine should not be treated as just another clinical tool. And many of our participants actually shared and spoke on the sacredness of plant medicine and the risk of over medicalizing it, if you will, or commercializing it. And at the same time, they were not necessarily rejecting the clinical involvement, but what they were really calling for was some type of bridge between spiritual and clinical knowledge systems. They emphasized preparation, the ritual, the relationship with the plant and with the medicine, the integrity of the facilitator, and the importance of the environment. And so one of the major takeaways of this focus group particularly was that healing is relational, excuse me. It's collective, and it's spiritual, not just clinical. Next slide, please. And so our second focus group was with veterans and first responders. And this conversation had a slightly different emphasis. Many participants of this focus group actually described traditional mental health support systems as very limited, especially when it comes to that really deeply rooted trauma and that cumulative and moral injury that many first responders and veterans undergo. And so psychedelic-assisted therapy for those who had participated was very transformative for them, but also very intensive. And members of this focus group were very clear that participants need to be prepared for what may emerge during the session. And so for this group, safety, structure, and having ongoing support before, during, and after were especially important components before embarking on a journey with psychedelic assisted therapy. Next slide, please. And then finally, our third focus group was the Indigenous and the Indigenous community participant group, in which we heard a lot about disconnecting from existing systems of care and really a desire for healing pathways that feel more natural, holistic, and culturally meaningful. And so participants spent a lot of time describing trauma as layered and often unprocessed for many years. So psychedelic experiences can be seen as potentially, or were described as seen as potentially helpful because they may allow people to access deeper emotions or memories, but with the understanding that that kind of healing can be intense. And so again, there's a strong need for preparation, trust in facilitators, and that emotional support for participants. Next slide, please. And so one of the clearest messages that emerged across all three focus groups was that healing is not only clinical. And for the Health Equity Council, this is a really important theme to capture just because it reinforces that any psychedelic assisted therapy models should not be designed around the dosing session alone, but there are many elements that need to be considered across like relationships, support systems, community structures, and such that surround an individual before, during, and after the experience. Next slide, please. Okay, and that takes us into our interview insights in which we were able to conduct several interviews with women who have experienced sexual trauma. Next slide, Janet. And so across the interviews, several themes came up pretty clearly. Survivors saw great potential in psychedelic assisted therapy, especially for trauma that feels deeply rooted or hard to access through traditional therapy. And so one recurring theme that we heard was that, especially for this population, there needs to be trust, safety, structure, integration, and individualized care offered to participants who are sexual or survivors of sexual assault. And it's essential almost for this to feel safe and meaningful for them. Next slide. So again, trust was one of the strongest themes that emerged. Participants were very clear that survivors need to feel emotionally safe and have a real rapport with the facilitator before engaging in this kind of work. And that trust also can't be assumed based off of someone's title. And so that trust and that relationship has to be built intentionally. So a lot of prep work needs to be done to establish that relationship, especially with this population, ahead of even starting a session. Next slide. So the next theme that emerged was healing trauma, and participants described PAT as a possible method for access to process trauma that may have been suppressed or difficult to talk about, but also made it clear that this process is not a short one. It is not a quick fix. And if deep trauma does come up, these survivors especially need to be in a position where they have strong preparation and support before, during, and after that experience. Next slide. Another major barrier that came up for survivors who may be considering psychedelic assisted therapy was fear. And so that unknown around entering an altered state can feel very vulnerable because it might bring up painful memories or feelings of losing control. And this is also another reason why there was such strong emphasis placed on having clear preparation, choice, autonomy, and safety planning for any survivors of sexual assault who are prepared to embark on that journey. Next slide, please. Okay. And then another major takeaway was that healing does not happen from the dosing session alone. Participants emphasize that integration is where the real meaning making happens, and that participants need time to reflect and a very strong support system afterward to process what came up during the session and then to get that support to translate that into lasting healing. Next slide. And then finally, one of the strongest recurring themes that came up, and we kind of touched on this earlier, was the importance of the facilitator who will be facilitating the session. That really does matter. And participants consistently shared that gender did matter, having lived experience did matter, relatability, cultural understanding, and trauma-informed skills and training to even think about embarking on a journey before knowing that they're with the right facilitator. And that can make the difference between someone feeling guarded and someone feeling safe enough to engage the therapy. Next slide, please. Okay. And to recap, participants were cautiously optimistic about psychedelic-assisted therapy, but only if it was implemented with care. And again, the strongest themes that emerged were trust, safety, preparation, facilitator competency, integration, culturally responsive support. And so the main takeaway out of the last 15 minutes of my talking is that healing is not a one-time event. It really unfolds over time and has to be supported before, during, and after the experience. All right, and
Great.
I will pass it back.
Thank you. And now we're going to hear from Maya Armstrong. Dr. Armstrong is one of the members of the team, the clinical team, and obviously part of this group.
Thanks, Janet. Yeah, so obviously we're not conducting these different events to have it be, unidirectional. Or maybe it's not obvious, but we're hoping not only to take this information, incorporate it with the work that we're doing for our particular study, but also to share it with our involvement with the state process. And we want to be able to feed back to the community. It's always frustrating if you're asked for your opinion and then it kind of goes into the void. So one of the reasons for this discussion today is to provide some of that feedback and really kind of create more of a dialogue than just a unidirectional flow of information. Next slide, please. As part of all of the feedback, one thing that was done was kind of the larger expanded team of people who are involved in the study, including HEC and the Psychedelic Mental Health Alliance, came to the university to where we're planning on conducting the research to provide feedback on the space itself. And that was helpful. Of course, limited in some ways with what we can do with this space, but also gave us a lot to process. Next slide. And so some of the community input, I just want to provide some examples. And probably the biggest thing is really the gestalt of hearing, getting all of this tremendous information that the folks at HEC put together and did such a nice job of highlighting the concerns around respect, support, cultural humility, and we are making a very concerted effort to weave that in through our own training, not only of the facilitators, but the whole team, so that anybody who has who interacts with the potential participant is aware of how deeply important these things are to the community. And and then I want to just go over some of the bullet points that have been very um, prominent. And so the affinity groups and the characteristics of the facilitators, so that does provide sort of some of the safety, the less likely for there to be a power hierarchy, and to really just allow people to be as comfortable as possible in these really vulnerable situations. Over and over, the importance of integration, and Hanifa will be speaking a little bit about that. Um, and let's see, there were some things that we maybe can't directly address, like the importance of the natural world. And so, we can't perform these journeys outside, at least not currently, not in this study. But what are ways that we can bring the natural world into the space? And this had to do with art and just the setting of the room and opportunities before and after potentially to go take a walk. Even things like bathroom logistics were really we were taking the concerns from the folks that provided feedback to inform bathroom logistics, music, and so many other things. But again, just wanting wrapping this back to the training and how this feedback is not just going to be put on a shelf and forgotten, but is very much kind of grounding our approach and the training of everyone who's involved in the study. I think that's it for me. So next slide.
Okay. Yes, I think we're transferring it back to Hanifa.
Great, thank you. So we've heard so much about integration, extended integration, ongoing integration, and I really like to combine the word embodiment and integration support together because people are processing and coming to their understandings and new ways of being through embodying things and implementing that on a day by day. And these processes spiral, they're not necessarily linear. And so we really listened. We had an intention of creating a ongoing integration and embodiment support experience for all of the participants. But we didn't know exactly what it would look like. And so the community engagement process that we just went through for this past year really helped to inform what should be some of the core pieces of what this looks like. So the protocol, right, is it's done in group, right? So the group will be moved, the cohorts will be moving in groups of 6 through a 15-week protocol, which includes preparation, both individual and group preparation sessions, group medicine sessions, there's 2 of them, and then group integration sessions that follow. And there's group and individual integration. And then there's a really innovative 4-week period where the peer navigators that share the lived identity, right, of the cohort members will be providing additional 4 weeks of integration. And that will conclude the 15 weeks of the clinical protocol. Then after that, all the participants and their family members will be invited to, family members and support people like loved ones, right? Will be invited into engage in the circle of care. And the circle of care is composed of a resource network of both a network of practitioners locally in the state of as well as national services and supports, resources like prompts and different meditations and music and things like this. So there's a resource people can plug into, a place for them to land. There will be access to for those, so it's a 3-month service or program. Within that, we're going to offer 2 sessions that they self-select, whether it's individual, group. That this pilot program will cover the cost for that. We'll also be providing them with, something like a WhatsApp or a Mighty Networks closed curated community where they can stay in contact together as they move through and journey. And of course, we'll be, asking input and getting feedback, getting stories of like, what was it like to kind of be a part of this circle of care? How can we improve it? And this is something that we want to, again, do across all of our pilots that we're going to be doing, as well as encouraging other researchers, other systems of care taking on PAT models to say, hey, this is something and a resource that can be a part of your care model, right? Because we know that that circle of care is going to extend beyond the study itself. And so we'll be sharing more about that. But it's really exciting. And one of the bigger pieces of that was added was, well, what about the family? What about the support people? What about the loved ones of participants? What kind of care and support? What type of training? What type of assistance and connection can we be providing them? So that was something that was added to this circle of care directly from the feedback of this community engagement process. I'm complete. I guess this is still me, actually.
It's still you.
You can go to the next slide. Yeah. And so just really quickly throughout this process, dissemination, sharing information about this model and about the study, about its hopes, about its impacts. We got in front of a lot of people this past year, which was pretty exciting. So we spoke at the MAPS Psychedelic Science Conference last summer in Denver. And I think our room had over 300 people in it. The conference invited like over 10,000 participants. And so we were able to bring New Mexico into the room and to talk about the study, to talk about the community engagement process and its impact, which was really, really, really dope, really, really exciting. You can go to the next slide. And also, like Janice spoke to earlier, we were able to be a part of a statewide gathering that happened just after Senate Bill 219 was passed. Both Larry and I and others were invited to kind of be speakers at this event. And it's been really beautiful, actually, the way things work, right? How the study was moving and concurrently the state was moving toward the passing of SB 219, and now the two are weaving together. So we were able to speak about that at that event. And then Dr. Larry Lehman was able to be one of the speakers at a fabulous event that was put on by the Lamania Foundation last fall. It was called The Enchanted State, and it was really highlighting psychedelic and sacred medicines in New Mexico, the keepers of those practices and medicines, and the emerging psychedelic-assisted care and wellness community and system rising up here in New Mexico. And so Larry was able to speak again about this project, our work, and the importance of engaging the community as we build systems of care.
And then now we're going to turn it back over to Larry Lehman.
Thank you. That was great. Everybody's presentations, the whole process. Next steps, there's like a lot of streams moving forward. I want to make sure I share all the streams. This project is not just about informing the pilot trials. It really is about informing the state process. And I've seen a lot of people actually in the chat that are involved in that. And there's a link that was put up there to the meetings. But we have an advisory board. But we have lots of committee meetings where people can join in and continue to get community input into how that program develops. As far as the next steps with the study, we're just moving forward in opening that up. We're starting in the next week or so to be starting to screen people who want to be in one of the groups. The first two groups are going to be veterans and first responders. First responders actually focusing for firemen initially. The next two groups will be women survivors of sexual trauma. But at this point, if people are veterans or first, you're interested in being part of the study, you can leave your name and we'll contact you. The other steps that are moving forward, to us, the community engagement is not like a one-time thing where we engage with the community and then we move forward. It's like continuing to have the streams moving forward together. So we're still working out how we're going to do that, but we really value our partnership with Health Equity Council and our plan to have ongoing community engagement and interaction as the study progresses. PMHA, Hanifa has been presenting is part of that group and helping us to develop develop that expanded integration model. So all these streams are continuing to move forward. There will be two more groups, and we're still actually working with that. We're, one of the areas that came up during the meetings was working with Indigenous and tribal people, and we're exploring working with Indigenous and tribal groups for those last two groups. And actually, if people are from those groups and want to contact, feel free to reach out, and we could talk about that. The study to us continues to be co-created with the community. So tell us what you're thinking and tell us some ways that we can move forward together. So thank you. That's a whole lot of information that we dropped with you. I appreciate everybody's time, but really we have time now for for questions and thoughts. Dr. Armstrong's been fielding questions, but if people have other questions, this is a great time to do that. One I may direct a little bit, because we've gotten a lot of things about the facilitators. And so what we're using for the facilitators is two people that have like license training. They can be therapists, they can be physicians, and then two people who are peers. So we have a ratio of four people that are facilitating to 6 people in the group is how we're doing that. For the facilitators training, as people probably know, we don't have that training in New Mexico yet. So our peers went up to Colorado and completed training. But what's exciting is this is happening while we're developing the program, and we anticipate that there will be the potential for people to get training in New Mexico over the next few years as the program develops.